Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello, everybody. You're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, and talks about all things in the NDIS world. I'm your host today. My name is Matthew, and today we're joined by two guest speakers, Alex and Sam. How are you doing, Alex and Sam?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having us here today.
Excellent. So can you guys just briefly just tell me about what you guys do, who you are?
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks for having us. Myself, Sam Tucker, and Alex Marshall, we started Specialist Disability Accommodation 3 or 4 years ago. We're an SDA provider and SDA developer based in Adelaide, South Australia. And we operate in South Australia, but also on a national scale. And we're looking to expand our presence all around Australia.
Excellent. No worries. So how long have you guys been kind of operating for?
As I mentioned, 3 or 4 years. I think we originally started the business and been more active over the last 2 years. We came together because we'd met each other in our other careers. Alex has got 20 years experience in the disability sector, and he had experience developing disability accommodation prior to the NDIS coming in when he was working at his family's business, SA Care. My background is in commercial property, in property valuation and consultancy. And I met Alex because I was actually valuing some of the accommodation that SA Care were developing and that Alex had been directly involved in. And we got chatting, we had similar interests, and we saw that there was some opportunities as the NDIS was evolving. And, the long story short is that we saw there was an opportunity to create a business in this sector with my background, being one side being the commercial property side of things and residential property, and Alex's being disability. We thought it was a really unique and good mix to take on this new sector.
Yeah, excellent. So I suppose you mentioned it's been about 4 years. It must have changed significantly, over that course in terms of what you've been exposed to and the way the industry has changed, I suppose.
Alex, did you want to jump in on the industry?
I think personally, for me, it's been better part of 15 years developing disability accommodation. So we were doing it back when there was really the really low quality stuff, and we were doing it to a much higher level. And so when the NDIS came along, it was a bit of fresh air, because we thought that it was going to make everyone's lives a lot easier. However, the size of the NDIS and some of the tricks that come along with it obviously makes some things complex. But especially in the last couple of years, I think 3 to 4 years ago when we were starting to talk about it, and I'd already been developing property in a different sort of structure. When I say developing, I was working in it. I've been a carer. I've done a lot, so I really get the space. So when it came around to 3 or 4 years ago, everything looked fine. It was pre-COVID. And then COVID comes in, and that really, I think, put a dampener on a lot of things happening, added a lot of complexity to the supply chains, building and things like that. And especially when you're doing apartments and you're doing complex builds, it really made it even more challenging than what it should have been. So, I think that in itself was a challenge. And then I think the NDIS has, as much of it as it's a great thing, it's also a $20 billion beast that has a lot of complexity. And by and large, it's great, but we all get to the same roadblocks when we go through the NDIS. So,
Yep. Yeah, we've encountered that as well. Yeah, so I suppose that leads into my next question, which is kind of what projects you guys have done over the years.
Yeah, so while we've been, together working for a few years now, our first project probably started 2 years ago with a set of old tennis courts out at Salisbury in Adelaide's north. We kind of embarked on some designs and looked at what we could do. And originally it was going to be villas or townhouses or single level development, but the council was calling for multi-level development and we had plenty of land. So we embarked on an ambitious project of doing 15 apartments. So 14 two-bedroom SDA apartments at 9 Brown Terrace, Salisbury, and a carer's office and community space, all centrally located, so very close to services, which we see as being really important. We were lucky enough to partner with Barwon Investments on that. I think you may have had them speak
yes,
on one of your
actually had a podcast.
With Josh.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, partnered with them, and that was a fantastic experience. And we've had our first residents move in February into the apartment, and we've partnered with SA Care to do the on-site supports. And we have 2 vacancies. So we've been really, working really, really hard to get residents moved in. We've got a happy community. We've done a couple of nights in the community room where we've had the footy on and put a barbecue on. Awesome. I know there was a pancake morning on the Anzac Day morning. So yeah, we've been working really hard to create apartments that are designed to allow independence. So you don't have to feel like you don't have to be a part of the community, but with an offering that it does allow people to interact and be a part of a community if they want to be. So
perfect. Yeah.
That's our first finished project, and it was quite a large large first project to embark on, and now we've got another 8 apartments that are being built at the moment in Dandenong, so in Melbourne's southeastern suburbs, and we are in planning for 2 houses at Gillies Plains, which would be high physical support and robust, one of each, and then another couple of houses out at Gawler in Adelaide's north.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Excellent. So that's really good. With those projects that are coming up, when do you expect them to be completed?
All of them are going to be around the middle of next year. So okay. Dandenong might be slightly before the middle of next year. So it'll be quarter 2 next year, and I reckon around July for Gillies Plains and Gawler. So they'll all be hitting the market at a relatively similar time.
Excellent. And I know you guys kind of started in Adelaide. Can you tell us just a bit more about kind of the SDA space in Adelaide? Because a lot of people are just cottoning onto Adelaide being a great location for SDA, and there hasn't been that much development there compared to, say, Queensland or New South Wales. So could you just go into a bit of detail about the Adelaide market for SDA?
I might say something here, and the Adelaide space. I think there's a couple of reasons why people are now going, "Oh, Adelaide's a good place." And I think, given the challenges in the NDIS around costs and cost to build it, etc., I think Adelaide's become very attractive because it is a cheaper city than, say, Sydney, for example. The SDA space in South Australia, I think it's got its challenges. The existing stuff that's been developed. I think when you're looking at the mix of accommodation, a lot of accommodation was built. There was a fair few apartments built straight at the start in the city. However, Adelaide's a lot different to Melbourne and Sydney, where people are a lot more used to living in apartments and the like, and it's a lot denser. However, in Adelaide, people aren't used to doing that. So I think the CBD apartments have really struggled in South Australia because of that. It's not where family networks are. It's not where the client, our participants grew up, and that's where you want to be. You want to be close to your family network. So our offering of apartments, although we're not in CBD, we're in a major northern sort of hub right next to all the services. It's where people grew up. It's where people's homes are. It's where their friends and families are. And I think that's a really important thing that people are forgetting is that.
Yeah. Yep, that's a big takeaway point, because I think a lot of investors might think to themselves, "Oh, well, I just need to be just closer to the inner city. I need to have it nearby, amenities, whatnot." And while that, of course, that is important, obviously, lifestyle relating to family is almost just as important.
Yeah, and what we find, just going on from what Alex has said, is that if you're there's obviously the land cost, which restricts too much development in a city. But it is that factor that the people who are going to be renting this type of accommodation, often they are in the outer areas and are more from a middle to lower socioeconomic background, because a lot more of the affluent, if you are, and this is very general, but if you're from a more affluent area, it may be that you don't need to have this government assisted rental accommodation, because, you know, you may have family members that have been able to either accommodate you in a larger house or potentially build something as an investment and then use that as a house for their disabled child or a disabled family member. So we're finding that a lot of the people that are going into our project at Salisbury, which was deliberately selected in a slightly further out location, are from that local area, and their families are really liking the space because they can come and visit within 5 minutes, and it does make a big difference.
Right. Yep. Excellent. Yeah. So do you see, in terms of obviously these developments, you guys have been around for some time now, do you see kind of what changes do you see happening in the SDA space in the next year or two in terms of, just in terms of both the design of what's required as far as what the NDIS is mandating versus, what's acceptable in terms of both what an investor might be interested in as well as a participant?
We think there's been, I think one of the things we found, and this has been noticeable having built apartments, is that there seems to be there's a difficulty in getting single occupancy in apartment into people's plans. It is a long, drawn-out process. And I think naturally there's been a shift. And I think that's because there's a big gap in the pricing guidelines between apartment and house, and then down to villa as well. And so I think that's how it started, because people were chasing those opportunities where the feasibility stacked up best. And I think now that there are those challenges in getting the higher funding for residents, people have shifted back to the more at-grade design. So houses have been kind of next, because they stack up relatively well in the feasibilities as well. Villas are harder to stack up, and, it makes sense. There seems to be a lack of villas across, certainly around South Australia, but I think that it's probably a national issue where there's
I would agree with that.
A lack of villas as well. And again, it comes down to the feasibility. So what we're hoping we're going to see is some potential adjustments to the funding where there might be a closing of the gap. Apartments can stay put, but hopefully there's a potential increase in house and villa in particular, because then people will be more incentivized to develop them, because it will make more sense. And, the other thing we'd like to see is we're actually developing a robust house at the moment, and we're sort of dipping our toes in the water there. It's a bit of we would love to see a single occupancy house option, or I guess an increase in the villa funding, robust funding, to encourage people to do more robust development. Because one of the biggest challenges as an SDA provider, not just a developer, is that, there's that unknown around the ongoing maintenance costs as well. So, we're very keen to get into that sector, but, it has to be viable as well.
Yep, I completely agree with that, because one of the other factors that we kind of discussed as well is that with robust, because of some cases how they cannot live with another robust participant, from an investor standpoint, that adds an element of unpredictability to that feasibility, I suppose, which I'd like to see in the next year or two addressed, or something on that end, I suppose. Yeah, and just in your comments about housing and villas, because we saw with all these interest rate increases, a lot of people are going more towards apartments. And given the fact that an apartment is a more, I suppose, predictable outcome, because you're just looking for one participant, versus a house where you might have, if it's 3-bedroom, say it's a 4-bedroom, you've got 3 potential participants in that property. You look at the average amount of people per dwelling in the regular residential market, that's only 1.9. So, is that viable given the fact that you might only have 1 or 2 participants in that house realistically?
Yeah. Look, and I think the challenge comes from the apartment single occupancy looks on paper like it's the easier option, but it's that getting the funding of single occupancy and also apartment into people's plans, which is more difficult via, it's not as easy to get.
Yep.
And the cost doesn't come back to the cost of the apartment. That's not the tricky piece. It is quite obvious that if they give single occupancy apartment to someone, they're then going to give 24-hour one-on-one care to someone as well. So that's where the true cost lies. It's not actually in the cost of the apartment. It's in the care cost. Like I'm lucky enough to have been a CFO in a disability care company, so I really understand the true cost of providing care. And the true cost, it far outweighs the cost of the apartment. So I think, while we're talking about it, I think the NDIS has done those numbers and they go, okay, well, it's going to cost us a lot more on the care front because we're going to have to match the single occupancy with single one-on-one care. So that's what the cost blows out. It's not actually the cost of the accommodation. So that's the reason why they'd like to have 2 people sharing, 3 people sharing, because there are those periods of the day where you can actually save a lot of money, or the NDIS can save a lot of money, where they can share the care cost. And I think that's where the real true hidden cost is of all of this. So they'd love to get everyone in 4-bed, or 3-bed houses sharing, because it makes a huge difference on care, like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. For 3 participants, it'd be, I could see a $300,000 to $400,000 a year saving.
Yeah.
Quickly. So the additional cost for a house of say $10,000, or the difference between single occupancy for a townhouse versus an apartment of say $20,000-$30,000, that's not where the cost is. The cost is actually in the care. So that's why they want people to share. So I think when it comes to that, back to that question of what is fair and reasonable, what is reasonable, which everyone throws around in the NDIS.
Yep.
I think what you'll find is there'll be a lot more shared, townhouses, villas. I think that's where there'll be.
Which I suppose is a compromise between the two, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's a compromise where you've got 2 participants who can share, and it flies in a bit of the face of choice and control, where you'd like to live individually, but you're being forced to live with another participant. But it's a huge cost. So I think what will happen, and is what I'd like to see, which is the original question, is there'll be better money in that space because places like Sydney, you can't afford to do it. It's just everything's ground to a complete halt. Melbourne's probably the same in built-up areas.
In certain areas.
So I think there'll be a bump in funding there, and I think that'll go Australia-wide, and I think that will open up the floodgates a bit because anything below HPS and robust, I can tell you that it doesn't make sense in South Australia, so it definitely won't make sense in Sydney or Melbourne.
Yeah.
Other cities.
And one of the reasons that South Australia has become, I think, popular on people's radar is because the location factor isn't a third of what it is in Melbourne and Sydney, like it probably is in terms of property prices. So it actually, Adelaide stacks up under the current scenario better than a lot of other areas.
Agree. Yep.
So I think when you say why has Adelaide come onto people's radar, I think that's why it's come onto people's radar, because you can still make it stack up in the Adelaide metropolitan area better than you can somewhere else in, anywhere up the eastern seaboard, really, unless you're in regional areas. I was just going to say we're actually, taking a little bit of a risk on the villas and we're embarking on some projects on the central coast of New South Wales as well, because we think that, there's going to be a need for those shared 2-person villas. So that's another exciting thing we're looking at the moment.
Awesome. And do you guys, in Adelaide, is there anything you'd like to see more going into the future about how SDA is done or how it should be done?
I think one of the biggest things, and it's not just in South Australia, to be honest, is there's a push to separate care and housing, which I completely understand why they do that. It's, if someone doesn't like their care team, they don't lose their home. That's the point of it all. However, I think there needs to be a far closer, and this isn't really about the built form, I think there has to be a far closer relationship between care provider and the SDA provider. Because when you wrap them together in terms of care and, speed of, if someone's needs change really quickly, you need to be able to adapt the housing to suit very quickly. You need to be able to have someone on site within 24 hours to make a change because people's needs change. And if you've got a really positive, good quality relationship with the provider on that site or in that home, you're going to get better feedback from the site. Like quite often participants they don't have a voice for themselves. So it's up to the care team to be able to make that phone call for them to say, yep, I need this changed. My needs have changed or whatever it is. I've come out of hospital and I need this. So I think there has to be a really good, strong relationship between those two. And I think that's forgotten. And I think a lot of that comes back to when you're matching clients as well to live in houses together, is that there's a real disconnect between, if someone's providing care in the house and there's one participant there, you can block other people from coming in.
Yeah.
Vice versa, the SDA provider can do similar things. So there needs to be some sort of mechanism or way where there's a stronger bond between those two where they are working hand in hand to get a better outcome for the participant. However, it can't come at the expense of if the participant doesn't like their care, they don't lose their home. That's the key.
And I think Alex is speaking from experience, particularly with, in his past in the sector, but also what we've been experiencing since February, moving people into Salisbury. That relationship, I mean, the SDA provider, in our case, we are the property manager, so we're taking on that role. And we rely on the carers to be the voice of the participants sometimes so that things can get done quickly for them. And I think, a word to investors out there would be around that, when you're investing in this sector, it's understanding that, who is actually providing the care to your participants who are living in your houses. It does make a difference. I think it can't be just seen as a pure property sector where that doesn't matter, because the residents do need a lot of care. A lot of them do. So
I suppose it's a healthy mix between efficiency and getting something done for the participant or the investor or someone who something needs to change, and then also giving that, I suppose, choice and control to the end user, which is the participant, to make sure that their needs are accounted for in decision-making processes, I suppose.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Have you guys seen any other challenges that you've noticed in the SDA space?
I think there's all the obvious ones, that I'm sure every other person who's come on here has said, which is increased cost of land, increased cost of construction. Price guide at the moment is probably out of line because of external factors, that the NDIS couldn't control, but, they're probably the major things. But I guess one of the things, it's actually getting some of the funding into participants' plans and having to work with support coordinators and all of that side of things is something that we spend a lot of, just something we spend a lot of time on. And I think a lot of people don't probably give enough credit to that, how you find the tenants, how long it takes to work with their families, their support networks, and meeting with them. And, me and Alex we're very hands-on. So if we have a participant who makes an application, we'll go above and beyond to make sure that they can see the property. We'll go visit them. We like to meet them. We want to make sure that if we do a building, if they've got a pet that's not a massive, I don't know, like a huge dog or something like that, but within reason, dogs and cats, are welcome. Someone wanted a snake. We said no to that. We told you a story earlier about this morning, Alex having to retrieve a cat from behind a cabinet. So we may be regretting our decision, but within reason, we'll go and we'll try and make it people's homes, because that's exactly what it is. Alex hangs the pictures for people on the wall. Some SDA providers don't like to allow that. So, we had someone who wanted a purple wall. We'll paint the wall purple. It doesn't matter to us because it's their home. So, I think, but in that you're meeting not just the resident, you're also meeting with their families, their support, and you're having to put a lot of, there's a lot of energy into that process. And I think that can sometimes be misunderstood by people who are calling us up, wanting to get into the sector without probably understanding the complexities of it. And I'm sure you guys have that as well, where 100%. People call up with, haven't had a lot of experience and they haven't really taken a lot of that stuff into account.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So a lot of people just don't realize different stakeholders in the industry and how it all fits together, because they'll see it from one perspective and they've kind of got a bit of tunnel vision when it comes to how everything links up. So obviously part of our job, and one of the reasons why we created this podcast, is to kind of educate people about different people who play a role in the process of creating the right environment in an SDA. Yeah. Yep. 100%.
Yeah. And I think that's important for others to hear as well, is the mum and dad investors. I think they're the ones who, it's a hard one. The mum and dad investors, although they're important to the industry because they're going to keep things going, I wouldn't encourage it, because you need deep pockets to fill to have vacancy and stuff like that. Like at the moment, if you're just going to be an investor into standard residential property, you can go and find someone the next day and they'll pay the rent. However, in this space, you may be waiting 3, 4, 5, 6 months to get the right person in there. People don't understand that. People don't understand how tricky it is. And the mum and dad investors, this is their super they're dealing with. It's the rest of their lives. So if the investment doesn't go right for them and they're not getting the returns that they read on some piece of paper, or they got on Facebook of like 10%, which doesn't exist, it's just, there's a real disconnect between expectation and then where the rubber meets the road. It's a business. It's hard. It's a people business. I think that's the most important thing.
Yep.
SDA.
Yep. Your investment is into people, not a product.
Exactly.
Yep.
Like people think it's a property play, but it's not. It's a people play. That's where the challenge is people have this different expectation. They think it's just easy. Whack up a house and someone goes in there, but every day there's something different.
So can you guys offer any, we're kind of wrapping up now, but can you offer any final advice for someone who's interested in entering the NDIS space?
I would say, I think Alex has put it pretty well there. It's not a property play, it's a people play. And, we love the challenge that we've embarked on, and it's a very, very exciting industry to be a part of. I certainly love my day to day, and I'm sure Alex does as well most of the time. But you need to be up for it is a hands-on experience, and you are dealing with not just participants, but their family and their friends and their support workers and network. You've got to be up for that type of challenge if you're looking to get into it. And because I think that's the reality of the industry, rather than just being the nice number that sits at the top of the pricing matrix at $100,000 a year as a rental income. That's a small part that comes out the other end if everything else goes right.
Yeah. Emphasis on everything else going right. Yeah.
You got to get all those other things right first, and then you can enjoy the fruits of what is a really good industry to be a part of. But that other stuff has to come first. Yep.
Excellent. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much for today, guys. Thanks for having a moment to talk to me about your business. Could you just share, if people wanted to get in contact with you, what would be your best, what would be your details, I suppose, for your website?
Yeah, so the website is Specialist Disability Accommodation.com.au. When the NDIS came about, I went and bought that and about 20 other domain names around it. So I was lucky enough to have a really good website, but that's where you go and you'll be able to see our projects. Our phone number is on the website, and our contact details as well, but it's the scheme name with .com.au at the end.
Excellent.
I tried to buy ndis.com.au, but they wouldn't let me. So.
I think I'd try to do the same if he could, but yeah.
Yeah. And our social media, we're on Facebook, and I don't know what our name is on Facebook, but on Instagram, we're SDA_housing. Yeah, we've got all our projects on there, and we're keen to chat to anyone who's interested to talk to us.
Excellent. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, Sam and Alex. Great talking to you. Check these guys out if anyone listening is interested in their projects, and we will speak to everyone next time on our next episode. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.